So good morning, everyone. It's the top of the hour, so we'll get started. Thanks for joining today. My name is Deborah Lawler, and I'm the federal liaison between WestFast and the Western States Water Council. Today's webinar will be recorded and posted to the WestFast tab found on the Western States Water Council's webpage at westernstateswater.org. This webinar is going to provide an overview of an energy water emissions dashboard developed as part of an Environmental Protection Agency Exchange Network grant. So a little bit of a different focus for us today. We are going to hear from Dr. Julian Fulton, who was the principal investigator on this dashboard and who is an assistant professor of environmental studies at California State University, Sacramento. Before I hand it over to Julian, I wanted to let you know that we'll take questions at the end of today's presentation. You'll be able to use your chat feature, or you can unmute yourself. If, as we go along, you do have questions, please capture them in the chat, and I'll be happy to read them aloud at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Julian.
Great. Thank you, Deborah. Can you hear me okay and you see my presentation?
Yep,
there? Okay.
Sounds good, looks good.
Great. Just interrupt me if anything goes wrong.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Deborah, and to WestFast for inviting me. This is a great opportunity to share with you this project that I and a team have been working on for the past 3 years now, and is just about to wrap up. So this is great timing. So yeah, as Deborah said, I'm at Sac State, or California State University, Sacramento. We're a regional comprehensive university, but we're also located right in the capital. So we have a great opportunity to work with a lot of state agencies. And also our university houses 2 federal offices. The USGS California Water Science Center is right on campus, and we have a chance to collaborate with them. And also EPA, the Region 9 Environmental Finance Center is located on our campus. So also great opportunities to collaborate with federal agencies on environmental topics. But I mostly spend my time teaching. I teach a course on water, and I teach a course on energy. And so this project has been a chance to really bring those interests together. Most of my work has focused on the water side. I've been using the water footprint methods to look at water embodied in food and the interdependencies that trade actually creates from that perspective. States basically sharing water through their trade systems. I led California's first water footprint assessment for our Department of Water Resources. But I've also had a focus on the water footprint of energy and the water dependence of energy systems, which I would say, unlike food, kind of tend to take a back seat to other constraints in the energy system, like economics and reliability and emissions. And so this project that I'm going to present to you today is really an attempt to put water and emissions into conversation, or at least in the same frame when looking at energy systems. So it's sort of trying to assemble a lot of things here. Let's move on. I wanted to acknowledge my collaborators. This has been an interesting collaboration between environmental studies, the department that I'm in, and computer science, which is in a different department across campus, and has supported a lot of graduate students doing their projects and some environmental studies students doing their projects on this. So this project has been, I think, instrumental in an educational sense also, in addition to serving, I think, some important management needs. It's been funded by the Exchange Network grant, as Deborah mentioned, which historically has, as I understand, been instrumental for the Western States Water Council in supporting work on WADE, and normally focuses on data flows, enabling data to flow into centralized systems Our project is more, it's characterized as a data availability project, meaning that it uses existing and reuses existing data flows through the Exchange network and other sources, as I'll talk about, to create a user experience that presents data in novel ways. So was really excited to get involved with the Exchange network and that community with this grant. So I wanted to acknowledge that. So what I want to do in this presentation is just get our minds wrapped around the energy-water nexus and the nexus between energy and water and climate, which will probably be a familiar topic to many of you. Discuss the motivation for our particular project, and actually try to demo our product, our dashboard online, assuming that the internet stays up, and then turn it over to some questions and actually provide you with the link and request you to take it for a spin yourself if you like, and give us some feedback. Okay. So energy-water nexus and energy-water climate nexus. This is the image that was on my title slide. I'd like to start with just sort of a landscape view of the energy-water nexus. This is the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, or SMUDS. I would call it an energy park. The big cooling towers in the background you see are from Rancho Seco, which is a decommissioned nuclear power plant that Sacramento built back in the 80s, and California's only inland nuclear power plant. But since its decommissioning, they've turned the whole footprint of this property into really an energy park. On the right side of your screen here is the Cosumnes natural gas power plant, a combined cycle, very efficient, sophisticated power plant. And it outputs about 10 million kilowatt hours, about 10 gigawatt hours of energy per day. That's enough electricity for about 500,000 homes in the Sacramento region. A huge asset for the utility. But there are some environmental costs. You have about 4 million kilograms of CO2 being emitted each day, and also from its cooling system, about 2 million gallons of water per day from this recirculating cooling system. So you get a sense of how these things intersect in the existence of a power plant. Rancho Seco, which is now, as I say, decommissioned, did produce quite a bit more electricity on a daily basis, emitted far less CO2, in fact, no direct emissions, and used a lot more water, consumed a lot more water in its energy production. Now, the other piece of the energy landscape, as I'm pointing out here, is they've kind of carpeted the whole property around the old cooling towers with solar panels. And right now they have 10 megawatts, expecting to ramp up to about 100 in coming years. And there's an energy technology that on average the facility produces far less electricity, but has, again, zero emissions and zero water use, or very minimal water use. So you get a sense of how electricity as an energy product, emissions, and water all intersect with different technologies in this landscape, and you get the sense of the trade-offs. And that's really what we were interested in going into this project. To get this information, I also want to point out that I had to look in 3 different databases to get information on electricity production, on emissions, and on water use. And so another motivation for our project is simply collating or assembling data from disparate sources. And that's a challenge when doing this kind of research. Another way to look at the energy, water, climate nexus is with a diagram, and maybe some of you have seen this, it's a classic, but it shows the interdependence of water and energy. On the top half, you see water uses in the energy sector, from extraction to production of electricity. And on the bottom, recognizing that energy is also a critical input to water systems, from extraction and pumping and transportation of water and treatment on both ends of water systems. So there's an interdependency of these two systems, and climate, of course, is really at the center, both impacting and impacted by the energy system and the water system. But I would say the weakest area of understanding and action is really on the adaptation side of the our energy system, particularly electricity production, generation from thermoelectric, hydropower, and other technologies that I'll go into. So the question is sort of, how are we going to sustain our energy, our future energy system with climate-driven changes to our water systems? If these systems are dependent on water availability, there is certainly an issue of adaptation when it comes to a changing climate. All right, so what do we know about past water demands in the electricity sector? This graph needs no introduction, I think, to this audience, but the USGS puts out its water use estimates every 5 years. And we see that thermoelectric water withdrawals are more than any other sector, but they've also been declining in the past 10 years at least. So, but we don't know much about consumption. The USGS just produced estimates for water consumption in the electricity sector for this past report. But we don't know much about the trends, and we don't know much about the geographic breakdown of how those trends are taking place. And we also only get this information from USGS every 5 years. And I might add, with a two-year delay typically to actually collate the information and aggregate it. So I also wanted to just, for those of you that may not be familiar about how power plants, thermoelectric power plants in particular, use water, there's basically three main uses or three main technologies that do power plant cooling. And power plant cooling is where the largest use of water in a power plant takes place. So once-through cooling systems basically take water from a water source, typically a river or an ocean, and use a cool water loop to condense steam in the condenser and then return a warmer water back to that water source. So a lot of water withdrawal, but very little consumption on site of water. Recirculating systems, on the other hand, use cooling towers, and in most cases draw water from lakes or rivers, or really any water source, sometimes municipal, sometimes groundwater, and use that water for evaporative cooling. And that evaporation creates a lot of water consumption, meaning that most of the water that is withdrawn is actually evaporated into the atmosphere and not returned to its source. So recirculating cooling systems have lower withdrawal rates per megawatt hour of generation, but much higher consumption, water consumption rates due to that evaporation. There are also dry cooling systems, and we have seen a lot of systems moving to dry cooling in water constrained areas, but, and it's I would say a big but, the amount of energy required to run a dry cooling system for the fans to create enough draft to actually cool power plants as needed, it has a huge energy cost to the power plant. So efficiency goes way down, and it changes the economics and the actual viability of dry cooling systems in competing with other systems that are still online. All right, so that's just maybe a refresher for those of you, or for those of you that don't know about different cooling systems and how power plants use water. So actual water demands in power plants varies widely based on those different technologies, but also based on the fuel source. And here we're looking at a comparison of different fuel sources in electricity generation compiled by Emily Gruber and Kelly Sanders in 2018 for a national assessment they did of energy water requirements across the energy sector, so including liquid and gaseous fuels, as well as electricity, et cetera. So you can see basically a huge range of different coefficients for energy withdrawal, as you see in orange, and water consumption, as you see in blue, per megawatt hour of generation, right? And so this raises questions about, well, what is our energy future going to depend on? What type of technologies is going to depend on? And what are the water demands of our energy system in the future? Okay. So as you might know from that USGS figure I showed you before, the declining thermoelectric water usages withdrawal is in large part due to the retirement of uranium-based or nuclear generators, and also a lot of coal. So very water-intensive power plants actually being retired in recent years. Okay. Some other reasons also that I'll touch on in a little bit. All right. So what is our energy future going to look like in the United States? These are projections from the Energy Information Administration, the EIA. So according to their what they call their reference case of energy projections and their annual energy outlook this past year, you can see what they're projecting out to 2050, our energy system, our electricity system in particular, looking like. Okay, you see again that continual decline of coal and nuclear, very water-intensive technologies, and so that seems like it's a good sign for water systems. And you see this ramp up of renewables and a sort of steady or slightly increasing dependence on natural gas. Within the renewables, you have a big range of technologies. You have solar and wind, of course, dominating, but there's some other interesting things to consider from a water perspective. I'll just flip quickly back here and point out that both hydropower and geothermal, which are considered under this scenario development to be renewables, are very water intensive. And so that's something that I'll actually touch on when I show you our dashboard in a little bit. But we don't know, in planning for this energy transition in the future and this development in the electricity sector, there's a lot of questions about water. Will our overall national water demand, withdrawal, and or consumption continue to go down? Where will it go down more or less? Will it go up some places? Will it go down other places? And what might some of the conflicts with water availability be on this horizon that we need to be aware of? Those are really important questions for the electricity sector, for the water sector, also for managing water. And those are questions that really drove us to build this tool. There's also some important policy contexts that we were aware of in this project and really wanted to speak to in developing this. One is the need for better information on water, and I know that the Western States Water Council also is developing its own data products that are in support of the Secure Water Act, and in particular the water census that the USGS has been tasked with developing in coordination with other agencies. The need for better spatial resolution and temporal resolution in understanding water use and also water availability. That's something that we think that our product really speaks to. And to be able to identify trends and projections into the future, and to identify conflicts where water use and water availability come into conflict. That's something that we really wanted to be able to show. As I mentioned earlier, there's this other piece of why we understand thermoelectric water withdrawals to be declining, and in part that has to do with the Clean Water Act, Section 316B, which covers intake structures of power plants and other facilities, but a lot of facilities, in particular in coastal areas, switching from once-through systems into recirculating systems. And so withdrawals, according to those policies, are going to be going down and have already gone down. And that's partly reflected in the USGS data. We're also looking at a whole range of state decarbonization goals in their energy and electricity systems. Renewables portfolio standards in particular are really shifting on a state-by-state basis what the particular energy mix or portfolio of any state will look like in the future. California has a very aggressive goal of 100% renewable or carbon-free, carbon-neutral, depending on the way you look at it, electricity by 2045. And I'll actually touch on what the implications of that are in a little bit. And then on the water availability side, we see that climate disruptions increasing the scarcity of water and likely the increasing adjudication or sort of managed allocation of water resources, and that the electricity sector, the energy sector are going to be competing with other sectors, the big ones being agriculture and other sectors like urban and mining, et cetera. So important sort of considerations that are really strong motivators for this project. So how do we look at power systems or electricity system water use? Here I'm comparing actually 3 different databases, data sources that actually characterize national scale water use in the electricity sector. The USGS compilation is that graph that I showed you earlier, and because it's a compilation, it's a little bit of a black box. They use multiple methods to collate on a county by county basis actually what thermoelectric water withdrawals are. And as I mentioned, typically we've been comparing withdrawal from year to year, or every 5 years, I should say. And just this past year, 2015, this past cycle, 2015, water consumption in the thermoelectric sector was characterized. A parallel effort within USGS has been done by Melissa Harris and Timothy Deal, and they've been doing modeling, using a modeling approach based on the thermodynamics of power plants to characterize water use. And they've been able to get a better temporal resolution monthly, but they've been sort of characterizing it at and reporting it at the national scale. And so there's a potential to get better temporal resolution, but still some limitations, I would argue, in terms of the types of fuels that they're looking at and the size of plants, which I'm actually not sure what the minimum threshold for the size of plants they're using. The Energy Information Administration, EIA, does collect data from power plants. It's self-reported by power plants on a monthly basis how much water withdrawal and consumption their plants are using, and so it's on a plant-by-plant basis. And those data are not aggregated in any way, so it's just reported. And the EIA has actually done some really important work in collaboration with the USGS to make this power plant self-reported water withdrawal and consumption data more accessible and better tabulated and relatable to particular actual units within power plants. So being able to relate, for example, particular generators within plants that might use different fuel sources to how much water those particular systems use. A fourth data set, which I mentioned earlier, was done in 2018 by Grubert and Sanders. And they, as I said, characterized water consumption across the entire energy system. So not just electricity, but liquid and gaseous fuels, et cetera. And they characterized water use at the entire US scale and it was for the year 2014, and they used a modeling approach. And it was, I should say, took a long time to do, right? This was a 2014 snapshot, and it took them several years to compile this data. So our project, which we're calling EWED, the Energy Water Emissions Dashboard, what we wanted to do was to focus on electricity, but try to capture a much larger set of power plants, acknowledging that not just the ones listed by these other sources are water intensive and require water. And so we were able to capture in our data set 9,000 power plants approximately, and we're constantly adding more so that we can get a really good sense of how water is used across the electricity system. Because we use individual facilities, we actually are able to aggregate water use to various scales. So we aggregate to the national scale, the state scales, as these other facilities do. But we also are able to aggregate to the watershed scale, which I argue is critical for understanding water balances within watersheds. And the scale that we use is the HUC 8 region scale in the hydrologic unit code system. And I'll show you that in a little bit. We're able to characterize water consumption and withdrawal on a monthly scale. And we're able to do this because we use multiple methods. So we rely on the self-reported data from the EIA, but we also fill in with modeled data and with coefficients from Grubert and Sanders. So the coefficients that I showed you earlier on a plant type basis, we actually use to fill in. And we also build our own coefficients for water use and water withdrawal and consumption per megawatt hour for the power plants that we have information on. So we use some judgment and best available information in the industry to really prioritize getting the information visible and available in a timely manner. So that's really what our goal was. Just to show you the range of results from these different approaches. The yellow bar you see is how much generation is captured by these different data sets. And you can see that our data set captures pretty much the full generation picture for the United States, up to 4,000 terawatt hours. So that's basically all the electricity generated in the United States. And we have a water withdrawal and consumption value total that is, well, in similar to some data sets, but different from others. So you see that there's a range of different results from these data sets, and they all have their own uses, I should say. So I'll talk about our use cases in a minute. So really the goals of our project were to provide our information in a timely manner, right? That we wanted to get this information collated and presented quickly. And so we rely on web services and APIs from different data sources across a variety of different federal programs to aggregate our data using computer code. And so what you see on the right here is actually the architecture of our system. We're drawing on different data sources, and I'm happy to go into that in more detail. But what this allows us to do is to aggregate, as I said, on the facility or power plant scale basis, and then to aggregate from there to other scales that are relevant for management. We wanted our system to be both backward looking, so we collect data from 2003 up until the most recent, and present that, and then also forward looking, that we incorporate energy and water availability projections into the future. We also wanted, of course, our dashboard to be user friendly, and so we tried to make it not too technical, but sufficiently detailed to answer some complex, possibly technical questions. Who might use our dashboard? Well, we went into this with mostly with electric utilities actually in mind, which are increasingly having to inventory their greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental impacts, and encouraging electric utilities to start inventorying their water usage, water withdrawal and consumption within their territory or within their generating fleet, and also maybe using that as a planning tool for looking at possible investments. But there's also some important things that our dashboard doesn't do. It doesn't do, for example, the type of economic analysis or capacity expansion that some of the other power systems models can do. And our like NREL has one that is incorporating water usage data and can be used for more specific planning purposes. Inventorying or looking at a watershed and looking at water balances within a watershed. Power sector uses are one of the big unknowns sometimes for watersheds. And so we can provide very quickly some very useful information for looking at water withdrawals and consumption within watersheds. And then also what we've understand is that really our data might be useful for data aggregation and dissemination efforts. For example, the water census, I think, might see some value in this kind of approach, or even the products that we're putting out there. And WADE. I've just been learning more and more about WADE, and I know that it's evolving very quickly. But there may be some value for WADE in looking at this system. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to demo some products, but I first just wanted to show you just a comparison of our findings of water withdrawal at the state scale to what the USGS displays, and it's pretty synced up. Even though we identify larger water withdrawal than a national scale, the relative breakdown per state is pretty faithful. All right, so the first thing I wanted to demo was sort of these water energy choke points, where water has become a constraint on electricity production. And NREL in 2016 did a compilation of cases where water has become a constraint on electricity generation. And here I'm gonna just flip over my screen sharing, I hope, to, let's see if I can pull this up, to show you the dashboard. All right, so I hope you're seeing the dashboard now, and I'll give you the link and the password at the end of this. But I wanted to just introduce you to what you see when you first come on here, and the basic configuration of our dashboard. So there's basically two ways to do queries and to find information. One is just using a sort of clicking on the map approach, but you can also do searches. We have a sort of smart search box up on top. So I was going to show you a case in Texas that identifies where there was an energy choke point. And we have a range of years here that you can search back to 2003, and it's on, as I said, on a monthly time scale. And you can also filter by fuel type. So these are the sort of dominant coagulations of different fuel types, and you can sort and just pick and choose that way to identify where different fuel sources are being used. Within the map, you can switch back between water withdrawal, water consumption, and those of you that are familiar with this area would not be surprised that the shift that just happened, where the eastern states are much higher in water withdrawal and the western states are much higher on water consumption. And you can also, of course, bring emissions into the picture here and look at a coagulation of different greenhouse gas emissions. Okay. There are some different scales you can look at, but you need to click on a state to look at the watershed or county or facility scale. So I told you I was going to look at, I was going to show you a historical case of a case in Texas. So when you click on a state, it defaults to looking at the watershed scale of, as I said, Huck 8 watersheds, and the color coding is according to whatever selection you have in the display field here. So I'm looking at the intensity of water consumption on an aggregated watershed scale, and you have your legend right here. But I can also click on withdrawal or emissions, and I can also look at the county scale and aggregate to the county scale. I can also look at individual facilities, and here the size of the bubble is relative to the metric I'm looking at. So here I'm looking at the relative water consumption size. Okay, I haven't pointed out the right side here. The right side is going to be tracking along with the left side in a couple of different formats: a table format, a line chart format, which is going to aggregate all of the pieces of what's in the left side. You can look at a pie chart of all the different technologies and fuel sources, their contribution to generation, consumption, withdrawal, and emissions. And I apologize for the crowding. I'm trying to show you on my small screen because of the text size, but I promise that if you look at it on a decent sized screen, it spreads out more and you get a better view of it. And then for absolute values, you have a bar chart for easy comparison along these different technologies. Okay. So I wanted to show you the case of out here in East Texas, which was identified in the NREL study as a location of a particular power plant, the Martin Lake Steam Electric Station out here. And looking within this watershed, now outlined in green, you can see the individual power plants within this watershed. And I can look within this single watershed. I'm looking at the aggregated generation, emissions, withdrawal, and consumption. But also on here is water availability. And I haven't mentioned this yet, but what we use for water availability is a U.S. Forest Service water balance and ecosystem service model called WASI. And they characterize water availability on a Huck 8 scale going backwards, and that's why we were able to incorporate that data. And they also have a forward-looking climate model-driven watershed product that I'll show you when I look at a forward-looking example here. So you can see that in August and September of 2015, out here within the Middle Sabine watershed in East Texas, we had water withdrawal exceed water availability. And I don't know so much about this particular context, but if I were using this tool, I would see this result and identify this as a potential choke point and a place to try to understand the water balances within this watershed on a more refined scale, right? So this is a useful way to identify choke points and hotspots where water availability and water usage in the thermoelectric sector coincide. Okay, so most likely storage, in this case water storage, was able to within this region was able to carry over sufficient water into those summer months. Because as far as I know, the Martin Lake facility was not shut off, or any of the other facilities. Okay. So that's just kind of one story that I wanted to share with you. One use of the dashboard, and you can sort of click up and then zoom in somewhere else if you wanted to look at a different state. Right. All right, so I want to now jump back and just discuss real quick another kind of story. And here I'm gonna, let's see here. All right, so back into the PowerPoint, and the second demo I want to talk about is geothermal. As I mentioned before, when I showed you those water use coefficients, geothermal and hydropower both have high water consumption coefficients, a very high use of water on a per megawatt of generation basis. Geothermal, as I've come to learn, and this dashboard is first tipped me off to this, is really looking at a resurgence in coming years. In particular in California, two new facilities are planned and, as far as I understand, being built, and are being looked at as an important part of California's and other Western states' electricity futures. Within California, it's actually projected by the EIA to be the second fastest growing technology, faster than wind and just behind solar. So according to the annual energy outlook, geothermal generation is actually supposed to surpass wind in California by 2030 and even surpass hydropower by 2040. Right, so by 2050, by mid-century, geothermal might be this really a big source of electricity in California. And I know that it's also within other WECC regions or within the Southwest and basin regions, at least on track with photovoltaic growth, according to the EIA. Now, that is the base case with large ranges of uncertainty, but nevertheless, it's something to look at. Geothermal, we know, is a large untapped resource, and that there are technologies, enhanced geothermal systems, which are capable of really unleashing that resource and turning it into electricity. Geothermal is capable of providing baseload renewable power. So as a designated renewable power source, and unlike solar and wind, geothermal has little downtime and intermittency. And as I said before, it's also water intensive. So I want to flip now back into our EWED tool and show you where we can actually sort of see that using EWED's projection capabilities. So I'm going to flip over, and this little toggle here at the top it shifts you from a backward-looking historic perspective to looking at projections. And here we're using actually the EIA's annual energy outlook projections. They provide those in an API, and we're able to load those in. All 8 cases from the, actually these are from the AE, the 2019 annual energy outlook, okay? So this is what we expect by mid-century water consumption to look like among all of the US states. And the same geographic spatial aggregation applies. So I wanted to zoom into California here to show you what geothermal is going to, what we sort of model geothermal to be looking like. And I'll show you what these, so geothermal in California right now is focused within the Geysers region, in the Eastern Sierra down here, and then in the Salton Sea region down in Southern California. But statewide, I just wanted to show you that geothermal is expected to be dominating water consumption in the future, even though looking at generation, it's only a very small piece of California's expected generation technology pie. Okay, so there you see something. And if I zoom into the watershed scale, let's look at the Salton Sea here. I can also see projections for modeled water availability based on that U.S. Forest Service WASI tool. And you can see that there again might be some constraints and considerations to think about with water availability coming into conflict with water withdrawal here out into 2050. So EWED can be used as a sort of loose and but quick and easy way to identify potential planning considerations for energy production, right? There's a couple other toggles here that I'll show you. You can actually, based on the U.S. Forest Service WASI model toggle here, are emissions scenarios, so RCP 4.5 and 8.5. You can choose individual climate models, and those are those toggle the water availability. So right now we're looking at an average of 20 climate models in the future. Okay. So that's kind of another story that I think EWED can show quite well. And I would like to know from you, what other uses you see in this. Just popping back to my last couple slides, and then I would love to get your thoughts and questions. In the future, our main priority is finding EWED a home. This has been a 3-year project, and it's coming to a close. And right now we're hosting it, but it's driven by this funding and student labor, and we would like to find a home for this. So basically server and IT support. It is largely automated, but with some minimal IT support, I think we can keep this going and actually continue to improve it. Lots of room for improvement on the user interface, display and sorting options, and also making it more useful for different use cases. So allowing for users to input data, for example, on water availability or on specific power plant water consumption and withdrawal coefficients. And we've also been doing some experimental machine learning on the side to look at projecting and looking at evolution of water use coefficients at the facility and at aggregated scales also. Okay. I think there's something to do there. And then also I just wanted to mention as a side is a new Exchange Network grant that we're starting this year, which is a very different focus, but I think also quite interesting maybe to this group, building citizen science data exchange for municipal stormwater permitting system and compliance, particularly with what is important in California right now, we call the trash amendments, but basically trash inventorying and assessment for TMDLs and water quality. Here's my references, and I thank you for your attention and for your questions. And I'll just go ahead and put up the website URL here, and please feel free to hop in and see if it speaks to you, and do try to break it and let us know what you find. In the bottom right corner, there's a little feedback box, and I would love to hear from you there or at my email address that I provide here. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Julian. So that concludes the webinar, and so now we're going to open it up for questions. Go ahead, Tony.
Thanks, Julian. I appreciate the presentation. Wade did get started with some of the ARRA funds to the Department of Energy, and part of that was working with the governors at looking at water requirements for energy transmission, but that's obviously related to generation. One of the things that we found working with the Western Electric Coordinating Council was that water was not a significant cost constraint. You've noted that there are some choke points, and I'm curious how you see water. Will it really be a constraint to future development, energy development?
That is, thanks, Tony. That is the question, right? It was a big concern, and my reading of the sort of literature and reporting timeline was this was a really hot topic about 10, 15 years ago, and we're at a point where we really haven't seen a whole lot of constraints yet. And I think that for the most part, our electricity system has been in a relative stasis. it's been developing, sure, and there's been, you know, this transition towards renewables, especially photovoltaics. But if we're looking at these deep decarbonization programs like California is implementing, the issue of having baseload power, the cost of storage is going to become relative to the cost of doing other technologies like geothermal and biomass potentially is another big one that I didn't mention. Both very, very water intensive activities, not to mention declines in our hydropower. So I think as both the water availability side becomes more and more constrained by climate change, and at the same time our energy system is being aggressively transformed into this renewables-based system and all the challenges that brings, I think that new choke points may develop, but it's really hard to see what those might be without tools like EWED or some of the other modeling tools that are out there. So I do think that it's important to keep these the reading of water and energy into the intersection, that nexus, to keep that information visible to us as we do this. And so one of the things that I like about EWED is that we do try to automate it, and we try to have it be timely so that we can sort of track this stuff as it emerges.
Thanks. It was interesting to see that most of your choke points were in the east, where we would think they don't have water problems.
Well, that's the NREL study from 2016 when they did the inventory of actual curtailments at power plants, right? And yeah, there were very few cases in the West, but that was from a different era. And I do think that the forward-looking aspect of this is critical.
One more follow-up. You mentioned the importance of, or growing importance in California and perhaps elsewhere, of geothermal, and noted that it can carry the base load. And that still, I guess, is a concern with our renewable portfolio standards. Some of what I've heard in the past, at least, is that getting beyond 30% with those renewables can create some real reliability issues.
Sorry, you cut out for a sec there. The what creates the reliability issues?
I was sorry that if you get beyond a 30% renewable portfolio standard, there are some reliability issues. You still need the base load.
Sure. Yeah, reliability is the big constraint with transitioning to renewables, and it depends on the assumptions of what the generation mix, technology mix of that 30% is, right? So if you incorporate biomass or geothermal, or to the extent hydropower is available, those are all potentially baseload power sources, and so they can help sort of extend that. Storage also is an important piece that can help, you know, increase the renewables penetration.
Thank you.
Great. So I have a question coming in from Michelle Bushman. She says, is the projected increase in geothermal water use anticipated to divert existing freshwater supplies for energy consumption? Or will it use deep, regional, warm, brackish groundwater that is not otherwise currently in use?
Yeah, hi Michelle, and that's a great question. And I'm only just starting to identify this as a topic of something to look at. And from what I know about California, there's been a mix. So for example, our most productive geothermal resource is at the geysers, and it requires actually a huge amount of water to be brought into the region to supplement the geothermal resource. It wouldn't, the geothermal resource and generation in turn wouldn't be as productive if they didn't have supplemental water brought in, actually piped in from, they actually use wastewater from, treated wastewater from the city of Santa Rosa and from Lake County, and they actually use that to inject underground. And so it is, you know, considered a use of recycled water, but that the need for additional fresh water to supplement these geothermal wells is something that is going to be important. So I know a little bit about the Eastern Sierra case in California, where those facilities have been looking for new sources of water to supplement those geothermal wells. I know a bit less about the Salton Sea case, but for most geothermal generation technologies, you still need a cooling system. And you cannot use heavy, very saline water in a recirculating system. You would simply have too much scaling and too much minerals, and it would degrade the system. So you do need a supplemental source of fresh water, even when you have a system like in the Salton Sea, where the geothermal resource is highly saline, and even if that water is used to heat a power plant on the surface, but then just pumped back underground. So I think looking for new sources of fresh water will be part of most geothermal expansion. And the question is just, where is that going to come from? So I think it's on a case-by-case basis, but I think you've hit on, for geothermal, that exact, the important question that we can look at.
Great, thanks. Okay, Jessica has her hand raised. You want to go ahead, Jessica?
Hi, my name's Jessica Reimer, and I'm with the Western States Water Council. So Julian, thanks so much for the presentation. This looks like a huge effort that you guys went through to pull all these models and, you know, be able to look backward and forward and all the data to support that. So this is a really cool tool. But the question that I had was kind of along the reliability line that Tony brought up. You know, it seems like this could be potentially used as a tool to look at reliability, especially as, you know, we have all of these other issues that are related to that, you know, even just looking at the wildfires in California this year. Do you anticipate this tool being able to support some of that reliability planning? And if so, you know, like maybe WEC or Cal ISO or some of those planning organizations could be a potential, you know, home for a tool like this, and just wondering kind of what your thoughts are on that, and, you know, how water can, you know, availability can play into some of that reliability planning. I know you can't do the economic analysis so much, but, you know, that availability may be a really important piece of that.
Yeah, that's a great question. The methods we use for projection simply take the existing fleet of power plants and allocate on a per fuel type basis projected generation onto that existing fleet. So we are not able to capture with this method any transmission or even capacity expansion that sort of gets at the reliability modeling. So how it could interface with the reliability models is looking at taking a reliability model and looking at, well, taking that projected sort of fleet of a reliable grid and fleet of power plants, and mapping that into EWED to look at where those projected generations might come into conflict on a watershed scale with water availability. So I think it might work sort of in a supplemental way to look at you know, where this economically and grid-based reliable system might also have water constraints, right? Because as Tony pointed out, the water doesn't show up in those reliability models as a constraint, right?
Okay, I have a question coming in from Roger Gorky. He asks, does the tool distinguish between withdrawals versus consumption?
It does, Roger. Both in the table view and in the map, you can actually toggle back and forth between withdrawal and consumption. So yes, it does.
Okay. And Adil Abdullah has his hand raised. Go ahead, Adil.
Thanks, Deb. Can you hear me fine?
Yep.
Great. Yeah. Hey, Julian, thank you so much. So I manage the Water Data Exchange Program, WADE, here at the Council, and we would love to chat with you if you have some time later. I think Ryan James, our technical lead, is here as well. But yeah, would you have some time later maybe to chat with us? We would love to chat with you about like kind of the use cases for WADE and if those would further support the tool down the road. And I love the dashboard, and we're literally at the decision point now to design WADE 2.0 portal. So we'd love to hear from you.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we can set something up, or I actually have time for the next hour if you want to talk now. We can just stay on this call, or we can set something up.
We can set maybe something up separately that works for you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Offline.
Great, thanks.
Nice to meet you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anyone else?
I saw there were a couple chats about the password. Yeah, you don't use the quotes. I added those. So the password is just CSUS space EWED. And that should get you in. And you can also find ways to contact us through that portal.
Super.
Yeah, it seems to be just not doing anything. It just says unknown error. And it's probably my kids being on school or something like that. I just don't have enough bandwidth.
I wonder. Looks like it's working for me. But yeah, if you encounter problems, please do let us know, and I'll try to get to the bottom of it.
Okay. Michelle says she was able to get in okay on the tool. So I think I've captured everyone's questions unless anyone has anything else.
This is Roger Gorky still. I know it's an energy water tool, but I'm wondering if there's, and maybe this is the connection with WADE, but looking at some of the other possibly major uses in a basin or watershed, such as ag or municipal, to see. And I was a bit late and you might have gotten to that, but kind of showing what some of the other stressors might be on a watershed or a basin.
Yeah, good question. The water availability data, the WASI model that I mentioned, that's managed by the U.S. Forest Service, that the value that we use for water availability, according to their model, already subtracts for those other uses, both within the basin, within the watershed, and upstream. So the way that they modeled that is a bit tricky, but the amount of water available for all additional uses after those existing uses from municipal, ag, et cetera, is what you see there in the water availability data. So yeah, we don't have a way to plug in additional water uses to look at that competition, but that is something that would be ideally something you could look at, especially in projections. Like water availability is supposed to do this, but agricultural withdrawal and consumption is expected to do that. So how do we bring in those additional uses into the presentation to see that? So don't know if that helps, but.
Okay. Well, I think that's it. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining today, and I especially thank Julian for your presentation. It was really great.
Thank you.
Have a
And
great
thanks
day,
everyone
everyone.
for joining.
Yep. Oh,
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
bye-bye.